In the heart of West Africa, where the sun scorches the soil and the wind carries the stories of generations, lies a country that many around the world barely glance at on the map: Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation, often overshadowed by the geopolitical giants surrounding it. Burkina Faso has for decades faced the uphill battle of poverty, underdevelopment, and neglect. But if you think this is just another tale of African struggle, think again. Because under the surface, far from the eyes of global media, a quiet revolution is brewing. It didn't begin with a protest or a flashy political campaign. It wasn't sparked by a foreign investment or an NGO report. No, it began with something far more grounded. It began with tomatoes. Yes, tomatoes. In a village on the outskirts of Bobo Dioulasso, farmers labored through the intense heat to harvest crates of plump, ripe tomatoes. Red as rubies, full of flavor, grown with patience and pride. But at the end of the day, the story was always the same. Those tomatoes would spoil before they reached the market. Lacking storage, processing, and transportation infrastructure, entire harvests rotted on the roadside. And ironically, the very same villages importing canned tomato paste, sometimes from as far away as Italy or China, were the ones throwing their own fresh produce away. This cruel irony was not lost on one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. A soldier by training, a leader by circumstance, and some might say visionary by nature. Born and raised in rural Burkina Faso, Traoré knew what it meant to grow up with little. He had seen the look of defeat in the eyes of farmers. He had watched young people abandon their dreams, choosing migration over misery, and he knew deep down that if anything was going to change, it had to come from within. So he asked a simple question: what if Burkina Faso built its own future? The idea wasn't to wait for handouts. It wasn't about attracting flashy headlines or depending on foreign consultants. It was about taking control of resources, of infrastructure, of imagination. President Traoré gathered a group of thinkers, doers, and believers: economists, agronomists, engineers, village elders, teachers, and youth organizers. People who understood both the data and the dirt. People who didn't just study the land, they lived it. Together, they launched what would become one of the most ambitious national projects in modern West African history. 10 projects to transform Burkina Faso. 10 foundational initiatives designed to build sovereignty from the ground up by addressing the core needs of the people and unleashing the full potential of the nation. But this wasn't about building castles in the sky. It was about real things, concrete things, things you can touch, taste, and measure. And the first project on that list? A tomato processing plant. Why tomatoes? Because in Burkina Faso, they're everywhere. Farmers know how to grow them, the soil loves them, and the sun makes them thrive. But for decades, the country lacked the ability to turn them into paste, sauces, or exports. Every year, farmers produced thousands of tons, only to lose nearly half of their harvest due to spoilage. Meanwhile, Burkina Faso spent millions importing tomato products. The economics didn't make sense. The system didn't make sense. So Traoré decided to flip the script. In 2024, the government invested in a state-of-the-art tomato processing facility in the Cumbia region, a place known for its fertile fields and hard-working people. But this wasn't just about a factory. It was about creating an ecosystem. Farmers were organized into cooperatives. Local transport systems were upgraded. Young technicians were trained in quality control, logistics, and packaging. And for the first time, tomato paste stamped with the label "Made in Burkina Faso" hit the market shelves. That red paste? It became more than food. It became a symbol that said, we don't need to import our dignity. We can grow it, process it, and package it ourselves. The project sparked something deeper. Villages that once felt forgotten saw trucks rolling in to pick up produce. Young people who once dreamed of fleeing to Europe began training to manage supply chains and food safety. Even neighboring countries took notice. But most importantly, it proved a point. Burkina Faso didn't need to follow the old blueprint. It could write its own. This was the essence of Traoré's vision. Not top-down development dictated by distant donors, but grassroots transformation built by the hands of Burkinab people. No flashy speeches, no billion-dollar loans with strings attached. Just real work, real results, and real hope. And the tomato project was just the first step. Behind it came roads, energy, hospitals, schools, banks, and digital infrastructure. A quiet revolution was indeed brewing, but make no mistake, it was growing louder by the day. In a world obsessed with breaking news, Burkina Faso chose to make its news by building, not begging. In a time when many nations wait for someone else to fix their problems, this West African country rolled up its sleeves and said, "We've got this." And that whisper on the wind, the one that started it all? It's not a whisper anymore, it's a movement. If you visit Cumbia today, you'll see something that looks, at first glance, like a typical industrial building. Metal siding, loading docks, rows of trucks. But step closer, and you'll feel the pulse of something much bigger. This isn't just a factory, it's the heart of a national rebirth. This is where tomatoes become red gold. Just a year ago, these same fields around Cumbia were the graveyards of lost harvests. Tomatoes piled up on roadside stalls, waiting for buyers who never came. The farmers had done everything right. They planted, watered, harvested, but still lost money. With no way to preserve their goods, rot came quicker than profit. That all changed with one bold move. The launch of an $8 million tomato processing plant, Burkina Faso's first large-scale agro-industrial facility of its kind. Backed by the government, not foreign donors, this project wasn't a flashy ribbon-cutting affair. It was a signal that Burkina Faso wasn't content to just grow crops. It was ready to transform them, package them, and profit from them. Inside the plant, the rhythm of progress hums. Conveyor belts glide fresh tomatoes into stainless steel crushers. Blades spin, pasteurizers heat, machines filter, blend, and bottle. The air smells sweet and tangy, ripe with opportunity. On the production floor, workers in white coats oversee every step, proud of their roles, focused on precision. What used to be waste is now wealth. Each jar rolling off the line tells a story of reversal of breaking cycles that kept farmers poor while shelves were stocked with imported goods. Now, when Burkinab families cook their sauces or stews, many are using local paste, made by local hands, with local pride. But the impact goes far beyond the factory walls. Over 150 full-time jobs were created inside the plant: machine operators, quality control specialists, packagers, logistics staff. And that's just the beginning. Dozens of farmers now have secure contracts to supply tomatoes, knowing they'll be paid fair prices on time. That security has transformed entire households. Families who once feared the unpredictability of each harvest now plan ahead with confidence. Then there's the ripple effect. Truck drivers transporting crates, workers loading pallets, technicians repairing equipment, food vendors selling lunch to factory employees. In every direction, economic life is stirring. And what about education? That's part of the plan too. The government established agro-training centers alongside the plant. Young people from nearby regions are learning everything from crop rotation and irrigation systems to supply chain logistics and food safety regulations. These aren't just jobs, they're careers. Burkina Faso is planting more than tomatoes. It's planting knowledge, expertise, and resilience. For generations, development in Africa often came as hand-me-downs used machines from abroad, expired food aid, short-term fixes wrapped in dependency. This plant flipped that story on its head. Instead of waiting for processed foods to be shipped in at 3 times the cost, Burkina Faso asked, why can't we be the ones exporting? The Cumbia tomato plant wasn't built to serve one season. It was built to spark an industry. Already, other regions are studying the model, preparing for similar projects with onions, mangoes, and cassava. The idea is simple but revolutionary. Process where you produce, and you keep the value at home. And here's the part that truly matters. The plant didn't require IMF approval, Western consultants, or foreign corporations to succeed. It was state-backed, people-powered, and locally designed. Traoré made it clear Burkina Faso would not trade one form of dependency for another. The goal was sovereignty, and sovereignty starts with something as humble, as powerful as a tomato. That's why people call it red gold, and just like gold, it's a national asset. Except this one doesn't sit locked in vaults. It sits on plates across the country, served with pride, fueling bodies and economies alike. The success of the tomato project has sparked a deeper conversation within the country. If we can do this with tomatoes, what else can we reclaim? Why stop here? Now there are whispers of dairy co-ops in the north, fish farms in the east, millet processing in the center. Farmers who once felt forgotten are now organizing into unions and cooperatives. Local radio stations run segments explaining how to access state support and agri-tech advice. WhatsApp groups for farmers are buzzing with updates on harvesting tips, crop diseases, and new tools. Burkina Faso has realized something vital. Development isn't about miracles. It's about mechanisms, systems, ownership. When you control how a tomato becomes paste, you've already started controlling how your country feeds, funds, and defines itself. And for Traoré, this is just the beginning. "We're not just building a factory," he once said in a speech. "We're building the idea that our people can take what they have and turn it into what they need. That's sovereignty. That's power." And that's how Burkina Faso will rise, not with loans, not with dependency, but with dignity. One tomato at a time. Night used to fall hard on the villages of Burkina Faso. As the sun dipped behind the savannah, families would gather around flickering candles or kerosene lamps. Children squinted to finish homework. Mothers cooked by moonlight. Small shops closed early. The darkness was more than an inconvenience. It was a barrier to progress, safety, and growth. In 2024, that changed. President Ibrahim Traoré launched Project 3, Solar Burkina, a national electrification initiative that aimed to bring sustainable, reliable, and locally generated power to rural communities. No longer would electricity be the privilege of city dwellers. This was about power for the people, by the people. And it started with the sun. Burkina Faso, perched under a blistering West African sky, receives more than 3,000 hours of sunlight per year. For too long, that sunlight went unused, an untapped wealth just waiting to be harnessed. Instead of continuing to rely on expensive, imported fuel and vulnerable power lines stretching from foreign grids, Traoré made a pivotal decision: build solar microgrids locally. Funded through a mix of public investment, strategic African partnerships, and technology transfers, not aid, Solar Burkina began constructing hundreds of solar farms across the country. Panels rose in fields once used only for grazing. Storage batteries were installed. Mini-grids stretched out like veins from each station, connecting homes, clinics, schools, and businesses. It wasn't just a light switch, it was a revolution. For the first time, women in rural markets could refrigerate perishable goods and sell them the next day. Children studied at night, their books illuminated by clean LED bulbs. Mobile phones stayed charged, allowing farmers to check weather reports, market prices, or connect with relatives abroad. Clinics no longer turned away patients after sunset. Vaccines stayed cold. Emergency surgeries could happen any time. Electricity had arrived not as a gift, but as a right. And it wasn't just about access. It was about ownership. Rather than outsourcing the project to foreign multinationals, Traoré's administration prioritized local cooperatives and youth-owned solar startups. These teams handled everything from installation to maintenance. Villagers were trained as technicians. Young electricians, many trained at national polytechnics or in community programs, became the new face of Burkina Faso's energy movement. One such technician was Mariam, a 23-year-old from Tinkadogo. After completing her training, she returned to her village and oversaw the installation of her town's first solar microgrid. "My father never believed we'd have electricity," she said, smiling. "Now I'm the one bringing it." Multiply that story by thousands, and you begin to see the spark of national transformation. The numbers were just as impressive. In under 18 months, over 1,200 rural communities received 24/7 electricity through solar-powered mini-grids. That's millions of lives changed, not by mega dams or international dependency, but by targeted, locally led green innovation. And yet, the impact stretched far beyond illumination. New businesses opened. Tailors now used electric sewing machines. Welders expanded their operations. Cold storage hubs kept farm produce fresh for longer periods, reducing waste and increasing profits. Young entrepreneurs launched phone charging stations, recording studios, and tech centers. One village even started a solar-powered internet cafe. Electricity didn't just light homes, it lit ambition. It also gave women more power literally and socially. In many areas, women led the solar cooperatives. They managed the grids, collected usage fees, and decided where to expand next. With more time in the evening and more access to digital tools, women began participating in local governance meetings, online training, and even e-commerce. As President Traoré often said, "When a nation powers its women, it powers its future." Of course, there were skeptics. Some questioned whether rural populations could maintain such complex systems. Others feared corruption would slow distribution, but the opposite happened. Because the systems were community managed, transparency became embedded. Village councils worked with technicians to track consumption. Local radio programs aired updates and public discussions. When there were outages, they were addressed quickly, often within hours. Burkina Faso didn't just light up, it lit up with integrity, and the world noticed. International observers from Nairobi to Havana pointed to Solar Burkina as a model for energy independence in the global south. Not only had the country avoided debt traps, but it had proven that a low-tech, high-impact model could leapfrog traditional grids entirely. But perhaps the most poignant image came from a quiet village near Gawa. There, a grandmother named AWA sat on her porch beneath a soft solar lamp, surrounded by her grandchildren, who were reading aloud. She chuckled gently and said, "We used to fear the night. Now, the night is when we learn." That's what this chapter of the journey was about. Not just infrastructure, but dignity. Not just energy, but empowerment. By turning on the lights, Burkina Faso turned on its potential. And in doing so, it sent a message to the continent and the world. You don't have to wait for permission to shine. Long before skyscrapers or internet cafes, Burkina Faso's backbone was always the land. From the ancient Mossi kingdoms to modern-day cooperatives, the soul of the country beat strongest in its fields where millet swayed in the dry breeze, and where generations of farmers rose before dawn, chasing harvests beneath a blazing sun. But for too long, those farmers toiled under a system that never truly worked for them. Seeds were expensive. Fertilizers were foreign. Machinery was outdated. And worst of all, profits often ended up in the hands of distant corporations or middlemen. Despite their sweat and sacrifice, smallholder farmers lived on the edge, dependent on global markets, import-export dynamics, and policies made oceans away. That changed when President Ibrahim Traoré rolled out Project 4, Fields of Freedom, a groundbreaking national push for agricultural sovereignty. The mission was bold: feed the nation, fuel its economy, and free its farmers from dependency. The plan didn't start with handouts or foreign investors. It started with a simple question: what if Burkina Faso could control its own food chain from seed to silo? The first step was reclaiming control over seeds. For decades, farmers had been pushed toward genetically modified seeds owned by foreign corporations. These seeds couldn't be reused season to season, locking farmers into a cycle of dependency. Under Fields of Freedom, local seed banks were established, storing and multiplying indigenous, drought-resistant varieties. Scientists worked side by side with elders to revive traditional crops like fonio, sorghum, and moringa foods that were not only nutritious but deeply rooted in Burkina's cultural identity. Next came fertilizer and tools. Traoré's government built local agro-processing plants to produce organic compost and natural pesticides using raw materials sourced domestically. Instead of relying on imported chemicals, farmers now had affordable, homegrown alternatives. Small machinery factories also sprang up, producing tillers, seeders, and threshers designed specifically for the Burkinab landscape. It wasn't about high tech, it was about the right tech. But tools alone wouldn't do the job. Knowledge had to spread. So the project launched Green Brigade's teams of young agricultural technicians trained in regenerative farming, water conservation, and agroecology. These brigades traveled from village to village, offering free workshops, demos, and hands-on support. One of them, a spirited 25-year-old named Daouda, became a local hero in the Sahel region. Before this, he said, "We thought modern farming was only for the rich. Now we see it's for us too." Within 2 planting seasons, results were visible across the countryside. Yields rose, soil health improved, farmers diversified into vegetables, grains, and livestock. Local markets bloomed with colorful produce. Exporters took notice not of raw materials, but of processed Burkinab goods, like shea butter, dried mango, and groundnut oil, packaged and labeled with pride. For women farmers, the shift was life-changing. In rural provinces like Kuritenga and Sangui, women run over 60% of agricultural cooperatives. Fields of Freedom provided them with land titles, irrigation support, and financial literacy training. No longer just laborers, they became landowners, producers, and decision-makers. Adama, a 40-year-old widow and mother of 5, summed it up perfectly. Before, I worked the land for someone else's profit. Now, I work it for my children's future. But Fields of Freedom wasn't just about economics, it was spiritual. By reclaiming traditional farming practices, communities reconnected with the land not as a commodity, but as a sacred trust. Ceremonies returned. Harvest festivals were revived. Songs once silenced by hunger now echoed at dawn, celebrating abundance. In the dry plains of the north, a village chief named Isaka stood beside his newly dug community well and said, "This land isn't poor. We just needed the freedom to love it again." The project also emphasized climate resilience. With desertification creeping southward, new strategies like zai pits, tree intercropping, and water harvesting were scaled up. Farmers planted millions of trees, acacia, baobab, neem, restoring degraded land and creating green barriers against erosion and dust storms. Satellite images began to show something extraordinary. Burkina Faso, once part of the Browning Belt, was now one of the fastest recovering green zones in West Africa. The youth took notice too. Agriculture was no longer seen as a last resort job. With improved technology, business training, and access to finance, young people returned to their villages to launch agro-startups, organic honey farms, mushroom sheds, digital marketplaces, and solar-powered irrigation services. This wasn't just farming, it was enterprise. In Bobo Dioulasso, a tech-savvy group of students created an app called Wind by God's Gift that connected rural farmers directly to urban consumers, cutting out the middleman. "We want our parents to earn what they deserve," said the team leader. The app reached over 20,000 users within 6 months. And yet, perhaps the most powerful transformation came not in the fields, but in the minds. Farmers who once felt forgotten now felt heard. Villages that once begged for aid now exported knowledge. Young people who once dreamed of escape now dreamed of innovation. Burkina Faso had done more than grow food. It had grown belief. Traoré, in a national address, put it this way: "When a nation feeds itself, it feeds its dignity. When we touch our soil with care, we touch our future." And so, under the West African sun, the fields of Burkina Faso whispered a new promise, one planted in sweat, rooted in tradition, and blooming in freedom. Burkina Faso had always been rich in spirit, but its healthcare system, fragmented, underfunded, and stretched to its limits, had long been a silent wound on the nation's conscience. In rural villages, a simple fever could be a death sentence. Expectant mothers traveled miles on foot to find a clinic. Medicines were scarce. Doctors were overwhelmed. And while global aid organizations came and went, real transformation never seemed to arrive. That's why Project 5, Healing the Nation, was more than policy. It was a vow. A vow that every Burkinabe, rich or poor, young or old, urban or rural, deserved the right to health, dignity, and hope. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't begin with speeches. He began with listening. He visited small villages, speaking with midwives and herbalists. He walked through crowded hospital corridors in Ouagadougou, greeting overworked nurses and janitors. He sat with mothers who had lost children to malaria and men crippled by untreated injuries. What he heard wasn't just pain, it was resilience. A people who were still standing, still hoping, still healing, even in silence. And so, Healing the Nation launched with 3 bold pillars: accessibility, dignity, and integration. The first target, infrastructure. Across the country, over 300 new community health centers began construction, modest but clean, solar-powered, and fully equipped. In areas where roads were poor or non-existent, mobile clinics were introduced. 4x4 vehicles converted into mini hospitals, capable of delivering care in the most remote regions. These weren't just vans, they were lifelines. In the highlands of Banfora, a mobile team saved the life of a pregnant teenager suffering from preeclampsia. Her father wept when the team arrived. "You brought the hospital to my door," he said, "when I thought we were forgotten." But accessibility meant nothing without trained personnel. That's where the second wave came in, a massive national recruitment and training initiative. Thousands of young Burkinab were given full scholarships to study nursing, midwifery, and emergency medicine. Retired doctors returned as mentors. Online platforms provided continuous training, even in remote regions. For many, this wasn't just a job, it was a calling. Fatimata, once a schoolteacher, now led a team of midwives in the Centre-Nord region. "We were taught that caring for others was sacred," she said. "Now I live that truth every day." Yet healing the nation didn't stop at Western medicine. In a revolutionary move, the project sought to bridge traditional and modern care, not divide them. For centuries, local healers had treated illnesses with herbs, massage, and spiritual rituals. They weren't enemies of science, they were guardians of indigenous knowledge. Instead of pushing them aside, Traoré's health ministry invited them in. The result? A national registry of traditional practitioners, standardized herbal remedies, and collaborative care centers where doctors and healers worked side by side. One such center in Tenkodogo treated over 1,200 patients in its first month, combining antibiotics with ancient plant extracts to tackle infections, inflammation, and chronic fatigue. "We heal the body," said Dr. Kabor. "But we also heal memory. Our roots matter." And while medicine was at the heart of the project, mental health, often ignored, was no longer overlooked. Generations of trauma from poverty, conflict, and displacement had left scars on the national psyche. Healing the Nation trained community counselors, opened mental wellness centers, and launched a nationwide radio campaign to break the stigma around anxiety, grief, and depression. Listeners called in, shared stories, asked questions. It was raw. It was honest. And for the first time, people realized they weren't alone. For children, the project prioritized school health programs, daily meals, vision checks, vaccinations, and hygiene education. In one school in Didougou, Headmaster Alassane watched his attendance rise from 68 to 94% in a single year. "When children are fed and well," he said, "they come back hungry for knowledge." But perhaps the most powerful transformation came through community empowerment. Instead of waiting for top-down instructions, local councils were trained to run their own health budgets, monitor clinics, and lead health campaigns. Villagers gathered for public health movie nights. Students performed plays about hand-washing and malaria nets. Elders spoke about nutrition, childbirth, and resilience. The message was clear. Healing was not just a government duty, it was everyone's mission. International observers took note. In just 2 years, maternal mortality dropped by 40%. Cases of untreated malaria fell by half. Immunization rates soared. Burkina Faso, once ranked among the lowest in healthcare outcomes, was now held up as a model of people-powered, culturally rooted health reform. At a UN forum in Geneva, a health official from another African nation asked Traoré, "What's your secret?" The president smiled. "We stopped asking others to heal us. We started healing ourselves." Back home, in a rural clinic surrounded by neem trees, a nurse cradled a newborn baby girl, healthy, crying, wrapped in clean cloth. The mother whispered, "Her name is AWA. She means life." Outside, the sun rose over the savannah. And in that moment, as mothers laughed and doctors worked and children played, a nation that had known too much pain began to feel something new, wholeness. Burkina Faso had always burned bright with ambition, but after sunset, too many of its towns and villages remained cloaked in darkness. Entire communities operated without reliable electricity, farmers storing perishables by candlelight, children doing homework by kerosene lamps, businesses shuttering early, and hospitals postponing surgeries because generators had run out of fuel. The darkness wasn't just a matter of inconvenience. It was a barrier to progress, a wall between the present and the future. And so came Project 6, the Power Grid Revolution President Ibrahim Traoré's daring mission to light up the nation, quite literally. From day one, the goal was clear and radical: universal, affordable, and sustainable electricity for every Burkinab household, urban and rural alike, by 2030. But Traoré knew this wasn't just about wires and poles. It was about energy independence. For too long, Burkina Faso had relied on imported fuel and patchwork agreements to keep its fragile grid alive. Prices surged. Blackouts were common. The poorest paid the most, both in money and missed opportunity. The president's message was simple. We have the sun, we have the wind, we have the will. What we need now is the blueprint and the courage to build it. So began one of the most ambitious energy overhauls in West African history. The first cornerstone of the revolution? Solar power. Burkina Faso, blessed with over 300 days of sunshine each year, became a living laboratory for solar innovation. Massive solar farms sprang up across the Sahel region, built through public-private partnerships that prioritized local ownership. The jewel in the crown was the Zena Solar Park, a sprawling field of solar panels that stretched to the horizon, providing clean energy to over 1.2 million people. What made Zena revolutionary wasn't just its size, it was how it was managed. Instead of foreign conglomerates hoarding profits, the park was community-owned, with revenues reinvested into local schools, water systems, and job training. Ali, a young electrician from Bobo Dioulasso, helped wire homes across the region. This isn't just energy, he said proudly. It's opportunity. It's dignity. But not every area could wait for big solar farms. That's why Traoré's team launched the Light Every Home campaign, installing decentralized solar kits in over 200,000 rural households within 2 years. These kits included rooftop panels, LED bulbs, small batteries, and USB ports for charging phones. For the first time, families gathered at night under electric lights. Children read books without inhaling smoke. Radios played music deep into the evening. Life, once dictated by daylight, suddenly felt longer, richer. It feels like we joined the world, said Aminata, a grandmother in the northern village of Yalgo. My granddaughter wants to be an engineer now. She says, if the sun gives us light, I want to know how it works. But electricity alone wasn't enough. The grid itself had to evolve. Burkina Faso's outdated transmission lines were prone to failure. In response, Traoré's administration modernized over 1,000 kilometers of power lines, deploying smart grid technology to reduce losses and prevent outages. Local engineers, trained through new technical colleges, led the charge, bringing precision and pride to every connection. In cities, smart meters allowed consumers to monitor usage and cut waste. In rural hubs, microgrid small, self-contained power networks delivered stable electricity where the national grid couldn't reach. These microgrids, often managed by women's cooperatives, turned isolated villages into thriving economic zones. One such village, Kumbia, once known for its candlelit markets, now ran cold storage units, electric sewing workshops, and even internet cafes. Electricity wasn't just powering homes, it was fueling dreams. The environmental impact was just as stunning. By shifting from diesel to renewables, Burkina Faso slashed carbon emissions by 30% in 5 years. Air quality improved, respiratory illnesses dropped. The country became a climate champion, attracting international praise and green investment. Yet, perhaps the most powerful legacy of the power grid revolution wasn't visible in megawatts or meters. It was in the mindset shift. For generations, people had been told to wait for foreign aid, for development loans, for someone else to build their future. But as villages lit up from within, something else sparked. Belief. Belief that Africa could lead the world in clean energy. Belief that power, literal and symbolic, could flow from the people, not just to them. At an energy summit in Dakar, Traoré stood before an audience of presidents, CEOs, and scientists. He didn't speak in technical jargon. He spoke from the heart. We chose the sun because it's ours, he said. We chose the wind because it listens to our land. We chose the people because they never stopped dreaming. Burkina Faso didn't wait for power. We became it. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Back home, as night fell over the plains, the once silent horizon now glowed with promise. From city towers to village rooftops, lights flickered on. And in that simple act, in 1,000 points of brightness, Burkina Faso told the world, the future is here, and it shines. For decades, Burkina Faso's farmers had fed the nation shouldering droughts, floods, and outdated methods with resilience. But under the surface, a quiet crisis simmered: dependency. Burkina Faso imported far too much of its food, especially rice, wheat, and processed goods. Local farms couldn't compete with cheaper, subsidized imports. And when global supply chains broke down, prices soared, leaving families hungry despite acres of fertile land. President Ibrahim Traoré looked at this contradiction and asked one bold question: why should a land that can grow everything depend on others for its next meal? From that question sprouted Project 7, the Food Sovereignty and Green Agriculture Initiative, an audacious plan to transform Burkina Faso into a self-sufficient, climate-resilient agricultural powerhouse. The first step was rethinking the soil itself. For years, farmers had relied on imported chemical fertilizers and genetically modified seeds. These solutions offered short-term gains, but damaged the environment and left farmers in cycles of debt and dependency. Traoré's administration partnered with local agronomists and traditional leaders to rediscover and scale indigenous farming practices, organic composting, intercropping, and natural pest control. These methods weren't just sustainable, they were homegrown. At the heart of the revolution was the Green Belt Project, a sweeping reforestation and agroforestry initiative. Across thousands of hectares, communities planted trees alongside crops, restoring degraded land while producing fruit, nuts, and medicinal plants. Mango groves, shade trees, and baobabs became living banks, feeding families and fueling small enterprises. Yakuba, a farmer near Ouahiguya, shared how his barren fields had transformed. Before, we prayed for rain. Now, our trees bring shade, water stays longer, and our millet grows strong. The impact rippled outward. With land regenerating, youth returned to farming not with hoes and oxen alone, but with drones, data, and dignity. Traoré's government launched the Agritech Incubator Program, training thousands of young people in smart farming technologies, soil sensors, weather prediction apps, and solar-powered irrigation. These weren't just farmers, they were food entrepreneurs. Fatoumata, a 27-year-old agripreneur, used her smartphone to monitor soil pH and moisture. Her cooperative produced organic tomatoes that now sold to urban markets and hotel chains. "We're not stuck in the past," she smiled. "We're feeding the future." To reduce post-harvest losses, the government invested in cold storage facilities, grain silos, and food processing centers near farming hubs. Tomatoes no longer rotted in the sun. Onions were dried and packed. Surplus corn became flour, ready for export. Burkina Faso's food was no longer just being grown, it was being kept, processed, and profited from locally. But food sovereignty wasn't just about growing enough. It was about growing what mattered. That's why nutrition became central. School gardens sprouted across the country, teaching children to grow carrots, cabbage, and leafy greens. Mothers received support to cultivate home vegetable plots, boosting diets and incomes. At health clinics, doctors no longer just prescribed pills, they prescribed plants. Moringa, known as the miracle tree, became a staple in nutrition campaigns, especially to fight childhood malnutrition. Food was medicine. Food was power. Yet the most symbolic change came at the National Food Festival, where President Traoré made a surprising declaration. From this day forward, every public institution, schools, hospitals, military kitchens will source 70% of their food from local farmers. It was a masterstroke. Demand surged. Farmers had secure buyers, and the state's food budget cycled back into local economies. For decades, aid agencies had brought in food during droughts. But now, it was Burkina Faso exporting grain to neighbors in crisis. The world took notice. Global agricultural think tanks praised the country's model, a balance of tradition and innovation, proof that sovereignty begins with the soil. Delegations from across Africa visited to learn and replicate Burkina Faso's green agricultural success. Still, Traoré remained humble. "We didn't reinvent farming," he said. "We listened to our land. We trusted our people. And we chose to believe that the hands that plant the seeds can also lead the nation." In the South, cooperatives led by women flourished. They ran organic rice mills, managed eco-friendly poultry farms, and built solar-powered greenhouses. In many cases, they earned more than their male counterparts, shifting old power dynamics. Bintu, president of the Ziniar Women's Agro-Coup, summed it up beautifully. "They used to call us helpers. Now, they call us providers." Meanwhile, Urban farming exploded in the capital, Ouagadougou. Rooftop gardens, vertical hydroponics, and neighborhood compost centers turned city spaces into green oases. The line between farmer and consumer blurred. People weren't just buying food. They were growing it, owning it, and protecting it. As the sun set over the Sahel, fields glowed golden. Silos stood tall. Markets buzzed. And across the nation, from village plots to tech-driven farms, one truth was undeniable. Burkina Faso no longer hoped to feed itself. It knew how. It chose to. And in reclaiming its food, it reclaimed its future. Burkina Faso had always been rich in spirit, culture, and determination, but for too long, it had lagged behind in one key resource of the modern world: technology. President Ibrahim Traoré recognized that without digital transformation, true sovereignty was just a dream. It wasn't enough to grow food, build roads, or educate children. The nation needed to plug into the global digital economy on its own terms, and it needed to do it quickly, strategically, and equitably. That's when Project 8, Digital Burkina, was born. It wasn't just about catching up. It was about leapfrogging, skipping outdated systems, and going straight to cutting-edge innovation powered by local talent. The project kicked off with a bold announcement. High-speed internet is not a luxury, it's a human right. Within months, fiber optic cables stretched from Ouagadougou to Bobo Dioulasso, and satellite internet brought connection to remote villages once isolated from the rest of the world. In towns like Dori and Gawa, children who had never seen a computer were suddenly coding in classrooms. Solar-powered tablets replaced old textbooks. Teachers received digital training, and entire curriculums were uploaded online, accessible even in the most rural regions. This wasn't just education. It was empowerment. "I never imagined I'd be able to study engineering," said Kofi, a 17-year-old student from a farming village. "Now I take coding classes on my phone. I want to build apps that help farmers like my father." But Traoré's vision wasn't limited to schools. He wanted every Burkinab to feel the impact of technology in how they lived, worked, saved, and dreamed. The administration launched the Digital ID and e-government platform, giving every citizen a secure biometric ID. This ID opened doors to digital banking, online voting, health records, and access to public services without standing in long lines or paying bribes. For women like AWA, a market vendor in Kaya, this changed everything. "I used to hide cash under my mattress," she laughed. "Now I have a mobile wallet. I send money to my children at school. I pay for supplies, and no one can steal it." The fintech wave rolled in fast. Young entrepreneurs launched payment platforms, micro-lending apps, and savings tools. Even livestock farmers could track their herds using GPS tags and mobile data. In villages where bank branches didn't exist, phones became financial lifelines. Then came the rise of tech hubs, creative spaces, where young minds turned problems into prototypes. In Ouagadougou, the National Digital Innovation Center became a beacon. From there, apps were born that monitored crops, diagnosed diseases, mapped roads, and translated local languages. Young developers weren't just writing code, they were rewriting the future. President Traoré visited one of the hubs and watched a demo of an app that translated official documents into Moor, Fulfilled, and Dioula. He nodded thoughtfully and said, "Now the government can speak every language of its people." Access, inclusion, ownership. These were the pillars of Digital Burkina. The nation also embraced open-source technology, building public tools that could be shared, improved, and localized. Software for hospitals, schools, even local government budgeting, all developed by Burkinab developers for Burkinab needs. Cybersecurity became a priority too. With digital growth came digital threats. So the government invested in training ethical hackers, building a cyber defense corps made up of local tech talent. "We defend our data like we defend our borders," Traoré declared. Another breakthrough came in digital health. Rural clinics were equipped with diagnostic tablets. Doctors could consult specialists in Ouagadougou via telemedicine. Pregnant women received SMS reminders for checkups. And vaccine distribution was tracked in real time, ensuring no child was left out. Lives were saved. Trust in the system grew. Meanwhile, digital storytelling took off. Young creators used YouTube, podcasts, and TikTok to share local stories, preserve oral traditions, teach languages, and showcase African excellence. One popular YouTuber, Mariam the Coder Queen, taught girls to code while wearing traditional Faso Danfani. Her videos went viral not just in Burkina Faso, but across Francophone Africa. "Tech isn't foreign," she said in one episode. "It's ours too, and it wears braids." The digital economy created jobs in graphic design, animation, software development, content creation, data science, and more. What used to be outsourced to other countries was now done at home by skilled, proud Burkina youth. Foreign investors noticed. African tech summits began hosting sessions on the Burkina model, and startups from across West Africa relocated to Ouagadougou, drawn by the talent and the vibe. But Traoré was careful. He placed data sovereignty at the center of everything. All platforms were required to store user data within national servers. Algorithms had to be auditable, and any foreign tech firm had to partner with local developers. "We will not trade one kind of colonialism for another," he said firmly. "Our code must be as free as our people." Perhaps the most moving moment came during a live-stream town hall, where a young girl from a village near Tenkadogo asked President Traoré a question using her school tablet. "What does it mean to be free?" He paused, then smiled. "To be free," he said, "means having the tools to build your own world. And now, you have them in your hands." In that moment, it was clear. The digital revolution wasn't about screens and wires. It was about hope, agency, and connection. Burkina Faso wasn't just becoming tech-savvy. It was becoming tech-strong, tech-proud, and tech-free. By the time the 10th project was launched, something extraordinary had happened across Burkina Faso. The land that once struggled under the shadows of dependency and underdevelopment had awakened stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. It wasn't just the roads, farms, tech hubs, or schools that had changed. It was the spirit of the people. Burkina Faso had found its new identity. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the Independence Monument in Ouagadougou, not to deliver promises, but to reflect on what had already begun. Around him stood young engineers, farmers, artists, elders, and students, all races, tribes, and languages, all Burkinab, and proud of it. "The rebirth of a nation," he declared, "is not measured by money or skyscrapers. It is measured by how deeply the people believe in their own worth and in each other." That belief had become the country's greatest asset. The 10th project, simply named the Identity Initiative, wasn't a construction plan or a technical overhaul. It was something deeper, a cultural renaissance. The goal was to restore pride, dignity, and unity by embracing the roots that colonial narratives had tried to erase, while forging a vision that could carry Burkina Faso into the future with confidence. The initiative began with a nationwide campaign called "We Are the Builders." Billboards, songs, and short films highlighted ordinary citizens doing extraordinary things: farmers innovating irrigation, teenagers building robots, women starting cooperatives, elders teaching history in local dialects. It wasn't just inspiration, it was recognition. At the heart of the movement was a shift in language. Traoré's government began officially promoting native languages alongside French. Schools introduced bilingual programs. Television news aired in Moor, Dioula, and Fulfulde. National ID cards now featured both local and colonial names. The message was clear: you do not have to erase who you are to succeed. Traditional clothing made a comeback, especially the bold, woven Faso Danfani fabric, once worn by revolutionaries. Now, it became a fashion statement of national pride. Tailors couldn't keep up with demand, and local industries boomed. Cultural centers were built in every region, featuring music halls, oral history archives, and art studios. Elders shared ancestral stories with youth who had once considered them outdated. Instead, they now saw wisdom and lineage. Burkinab hip-hop artists rapped over djembe rhythms. Filmmakers recreated historical moments. Dancers fused ancient steps with modern styles. The past and the future were no longer in conflict, they were in conversation. But the initiative didn't stop with art and language. Civic education became a central pillar. Every student learned about the Constitution, democratic values, anti-corruption ethics, and their rights and duties as citizens. The narrative shifted from waiting for the government to being the government, each citizen taking ownership of their community. National holidays were redesigned. Independence Day turned into Builders' Day. a celebration not just of freedom from colonization, but of the work done each year by everyday heroes. In local towns, statues of colonial figures were replaced with monuments to teachers, nurses, farmers, and water bearers, those who truly sustained the nation. A new museum, the House of Memory, opened in Ouagadougou. Inside, exhibits told Burkina Faso's full story. Pre-colonial kingdoms, the pain of slavery, the resistance of Sankara, the rise of youth movements, and the modern rebirth under Traoré's blueprint. It was not propaganda, it was truth, told with dignity. Internationally, Burkina Faso began to represent a new model of African self-determination. Delegations from Latin America, Asia, and even Europe came to study the country's transformation not just in infrastructure or agriculture, but in identity building. Still, the most powerful impact was local. In the village of Ziniar, 9-year-old Acha stood in front of her class on Cultural Day and gave a speech in perfect Moor. Her topic, "What makes me proud to be Burkinab?" Her parents, once unsure if education would offer their daughter a future, wept tears of joy. In the marketplace of Bobo Dioulasso, vendors carried goods in digital baskets scanned and paid via mobile app, but greeted each other with old proverbs passed down for generations. On national radio, a 60-year-old griot recited poetry praising the courage of farmers who turned the Sahel green again. It ended with the line, "The land gave birth to warriors. Now it gives birth to creators." And President Traoré? He no longer needed to give grand speeches. The country itself was speaking through its art, its innovations, its unity. The rebirth of Burkina Faso was not about becoming someone else. It was about becoming fully itself, rooted in culture, powered by knowledge, driven by justice, and alive with the dreams of its people. In a closing ceremony of the 10th project, Traoré summarized it best. "We did not inherit poverty. We inherited stolen purpose, but we have reclaimed it. We are not poor. We are rich in mind, rich in land, rich in will. We are Burkinab, and our story has only just begun."